Welcome to episode 1 of the GoodVibes and Co podcast. Today's unsettling fact is...
A chicken once lived 18 months without a head.
GoodVibes and Co. Podcast you know.
That's horrible. Thank you for that. On to more exciting and less horrible matters. This is Women's History Month, and yesterday marked Women's Day. So we're going to be talking about a particularly important woman, Amy Dilwyn. In 1845, and was known during her life to be an industrialist and an important pivotal point for the women's suffrage movement.
She was nicknamed the Pioneer by friends and was chosen as one of the top 100 Welsh women in 2018 by Women's Equality Network Wales.
What do you know of Amy Dilwyn?
She was from Sketty.
Unfortunate.
Yeah.
But went on to do bigger and better things. After a little bit of a rocky start of inheriting a significant amount of debt and a debt-ridden business from her father, she went on to bigger and greater things in leaps and bounds, being marked as one of the most important Welsh industrialists.
What business did she inherit?
So the business she inherited was a zinc works, and at the time it was in an amount of debt that in today's money would have amounted to something similar to about 8 million. So it wasn't a fantastic beginning, but as soon as she sort of began to inherit that, made huge jumps towards paying that back and did so incredibly quickly. And it went on to not be just the biggest zinc producers in Wales, but in Britain as a whole. So yeah, there is a reason she's kind of marked as that industrialist, and a lot of people would give her hate or criticism at the time, but as she became largely successful, it was more and more difficult for that hate to stick. Largely, that hate came from just her appearance.
Why do people hate her appearance?
Because she was seen as mannish, or to dress like a boy.
How did she dress like a boy?
She didn't really. It was still, long, pretty dresses and petticoats, but hers were slightly shorter. They were marked to be more for convenience than fashion. And the high collars associated with the time, hers were once again added slightly more mobility to her outfit, and a boyish coat was something a lot of newspapers marked her down on.
So she chose comfort over appearance then?
Practicality as well. So she's going to be wandering around the steelworks, or zinc works, which she was. She was there. She was the centre of it. She needed to wear something that would accommodate for her work. Another thing that we can't endorse on this podcast is that she was an avid smoker of cigars. And at the time, compared to the dainty cigarettes, a cigar was very much seen as a man's hobby. And she was known to just consistently be covered by a plume of smoke wherever she went.
Why do they have different cigarettes for women compared to men?
Girl cigarettes and boy cigarettes.
Why?
Sexism.
You're smoking the same thing.
Nah, women couldn't handle the bulk of a cigar.
Wait, were they actually different, or were they just...
Women often had white gloves, so they would have a long thing. Have you seen the long stands with the cigarettes that go on the end of them? Women would have that to keep the cigarette well away from their nice dainty white gloves. And they were seen as more like ladylike and pretty, as opposed to a big, ugly brown cigar in your mouth that would dirty up, grub you up your fingers. It was just sexism. There's no reason that men couldn't wear white dainty gloves, and there was no reason that women couldn't smoke cigars. But they made reason.
So, I heard she wrote books. Do you know anything that she wrote about?
Yeah, well, largely they were published. So she had a publisher and started off as a novelist. A lot of it was really central on the women's suffrage movement. So there was a massive push towards women's rights at the time, obviously. And she was heavily involved in that. And kind of later in her career, she kind of moved more towards novels and let the now very successful zinc works do its thing. Although she was still very hands-on with that as well. She went into politics a lot, and a lot of that was really prevalent in her writing. And the majority of it was public, and she did have a publisher at the time who cut out a lot of original material from some of her novels that didn't make the cuts.
Why did they cut stuff out of her novels?
Because it was very sapphic. So the kind of thing that, as they talk about her history, and there was more research done on her, she was seen as obviously this pinnacle for women's suffrage movements, and as an industrialist, the first kind of Welsh industrialist, or woman industrialist at the time of significant note. but the bit that was kind of less talked about was the fact that she was a lesbian. She wrote a lot in her works that her publisher took out about same-sex attraction, and in her diaries that weren't published until kind of recent history, there was multiple accounts of talk about her love for women in general, but a specific one as well.
Who was the specific lady she kept talking about then?
Olive Talbot. So she had her sights set very high. She was the daughter of a millionaire of Markham Park, I think, is it? Or Markham Castle?
I think it's Markham Castle, but...
Yeah. Well, Markham Castle in Markham Park, yeah. And that's the woman of her dreams that, of course, at the time never came to fruition. There was no evidence that this was a two-sided romance story, unfortunately. But I would still say that she had a relatively happy ending. She had an amazingly successful business and did a lot for women's rights at the time.
So Amy Dolwyn was an industrialist, novelist, and fighting for women's rights when everyone was against her.
Absolutely, at a time when very much as a woman in that kind of work, or any work at the time, was something that was frowned upon, she was pushing to make that difference and make that change. And after a career in politics, in metalworks, and in writing, she eventually went on to just live quite a modest life near the end of it in Teaglin, became even more active in politics, and lived kind of late into her mid to late 90s as well, finally dying in 1935, and ashes were scattered on her father and her brother's grave.
Finally dying.
Okay, sorry.
We've been waiting for this forever! Get rid of it!
So are you aware of the kind of blue plaque history in important figures scheme at all? Okay, so they have blue plaques around the country marking people of significant historical importance. The majority of those historical figures of importance are men. In 2018, there was a deliberate push to try and even that balance a little bit and get a whole lot of purple plaques put in to mark historical women of importance. So this is done by Women's Equality Network Wales, and in 2018 that included Amy Dilwyn's plaque.
Where is her plaque?
So it can be found in the Amy Dilwyn Park, following her name as well. It was installed in 2024, and it is up in this kind of centre of Swansea, up by where the arena is, on the side of a cafe up there. So that's where that can be found.
GoodVibes and Co. Podcast you know.
This isn't a love story. This is a struggling industrialist lesbian. this isn't like a beautiful story that ends and they get happily together because they both really hung.
Yeah.
GoodVibes and Co. Podcast you know.